Sometimes the hardest mission is when you have to adapt to a new role. From starting a first responder career to a new assignment to retirement, Greg Fernia is here to help. Greg is a retired special operations supervisor and a personal and professional development coach. He helps first responders and their families navigate transitions and challenges with purpose and clarity. Learn more at livingthegoodlifecoach.com. That's livingthegoodlifecoach.com. Law enforcement and government agencies struggle with parking citations, often because no one will pay them. Boots or other devices are costly, and they invite confrontation when implied and later removed by enforcing employees. With Tire Tag, you can avoid many hurdles and ultimately promote public safety and revenue collection. To learn more, visit tiretag.com. For a thorough conversation on how Tire Tag can help your agency and revenue collection, visit episode 204. That's 204. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, everyone, welcome back. Today, I'm super stoked to be joined by two friends, two colleagues in this public safety policing space. This is the first episode that we're doing, the first interview conversation that we're doing with people that I met at the Curve event. The Curve Massive is what it's called. But Siobhan and Chela are joining me today. So I'm just gonna open it up with that. There's a lot of conversations and energy that I just kind of want to let jump out of me. But at the same time, I just want to have conversations about where we're at in policing, a little bit about each of you, and then get to talking about the Curve and some of the things that take up the forefront of our brains and our passion for the industry and what the profession could use / need, all the good things. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Siobhan. Siobhan, could you please give us a little bit of introduction about yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Siobhan McTighe, and I am the first female sergeant for my agency out in Colorado. I'm very proud of that. I've got 18 years of law enforcement experience. The majority of the years of my career, I've spent working crimes against persons, which the bulk of my cases involve children. I'm a wellness advocate, and I go around the U.S. Talking about resilience for first responders and how to develop wellness practices and programs within agencies.
Awesome. There's so much more to you. I will say this now because I don't want to miss the chance, but Siobhan is one of the most humble people I've met in recency, and also kind. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Curve and the actual event that we all met in person at. But to get connected on LinkedIn, you're very active on LinkedIn. I think that your message resonates with so many people because it's from the heart, and it's this real talk. Some are posts, some are more extended kind of blog type writing. But then also, you drove me all the way from Denver to Aspen because I had no idea what to expect with the weather. So one of my buddies that used to live out that way said, dude, that time of year, you have who knows what the airlines will do, or trying to fly to Aspen. You should probably consider driving. And that's when Chris Shung was like, hey, you should reach out. But I not saying she'll drive you, but you should get to know her because she's local. She might know about the weather. I'm like, yeah, for sure. And then basically before the trip, I was like, we'll either become really, really good friends, best friends ever, or it'll be terrible and you're going to really regret it because we're stuck together for a few hours. So I will say publicly, very publicly, thank you. And it was a great time on my part.
Mine too.
All right, Chela, we'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I want to second your comments about Siobhan. So Siobhan's warmth will draw you in. And I think it's one of the things that does bring people not only to her LinkedIn page, but to the work that she does at conferences or these smaller trainings. And so the first time I met Siobhan in person was at the Women Leaders in Law Enforcement Conference in San Diego a little bit earlier this year. And I didn't want to tell her, like, hey, we're going to be working together on the curb because there was people around and I didn't want to start with that conversation. So I just kind of blandly said, We've got some friends in common. I look forward to getting to know you more," and continue with that. But really, I just wanted to be there to see her in person and give her presentation. And it was one of those presentations where you feel like you're the only audience member in the room because she's able to connect with her audience in that way and make you feel not only like you're understanding her message, but it immediately starts that metacognition of, I hear her message, I see how I'm going to apply it, and I see how I'm going to help other people because I participated in her event. So thank you, Siobhan, for your work. I know that it's hard to see the ripple effect sometimes of the messaging that we're putting out there, but you really are making a difference. So with that being said, I'm Chela Cottrell. Uh, I've been in policing since 2003, so I guess that's 22 years. I started in a one-seat center as a dispatcher, and like many people in law enforcement who are dispatchers, I didn't know what a dispatcher was before I started. And there's a phrase that you're going to hear often from dispatchers that's, "I fell into dispatching." And one of my crusades of the moment is to change that phrasing because it makes it sound like it's an accident. We accidentally did this thing, but we're continuing to do it for no particular reason. And I'd really like to start being more intentional with that and saying, I found my purpose. Or for those that are spiritual, I found my calling, right? And then I've chosen to rise to that calling or rise to that purpose each day that I choose to show up. And so I found my calling in communications for sure. And even though I did some forays into the field as a CSO and then in corrections, I just kept thinking about, when I'm out in the field, I can perhaps take 10 reports in a shift. I can perhaps impact 10 folks during my day. But when I'm in comms, I can talk to 50 to 100 people in one day. And that first point of contact at times is people's only point of contact with police for the rest of their lives. And it will shape their perception of who we are because they don't hang up the phone and say, "Oh, I spoke with a dispatcher." They hang up the phone and said, "What the police told me to do was," right? And so if I can get that mission across to folks about the crucial nature of their work, then that's really what I've been trying to do for the last several years. I'm currently a police services manager at the city of Citrus Heights. And what that means is I manage our communications center, and then I do some other IT-based projects and special projects. Heavy in tech, I also oversee the folks that work in our regional Arctic, which is a real-time information center. And so I'm involved with people at the National Real-Time Center and work kind of towards that goal of furthering policing in that avenue as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, we're going to get into like the curve more, but what was really impactful for not just me, but everyone, because we went around the room a couple times and like sharing impacts, but to have you and a couple city managers, right, to really underline this concept of team, of public safety, public service, like it's not just cops. Frequently, if we take a beat and we take a moment, we can recognize that dispatch comm centers, but our professional staff are like way behind the scenes, but we would absolutely not be able to do anything without them, right? And we think about the old school times when maybe a small agency, and maybe exists somewhere, but an officer has to handle some calls or like literal like call receiver and then go back to the station to look for something because they don't have records personnel maybe at night. What a game changer to have someone do that, right? And then you can have everyone be like synchronous and collaborative, but to really underline, like if we're talking about improving and innovating policing, then we have to talk about all hands on deck because it truly is an all hands on deck. But my personal compliment to you that I shared in some variation was like when you spoke and you presented to the group, but also in kind of some of the discussions that we had, you had such a balance of like objective, clear communications. Like it's almost kind of ironic, but then it's not that you work in communications. But there's like, you know, dispatch center communications that we perceive, but then also like truly communicating an idea in this very articulate way, but also with this depth of personal care because you are a manager and a supervisor and a leader. And so I think that's just so um I think that's so refreshing to see it in such this iconic form for me because it is really what we need. I think a lot of what Simon Sinek's about through his writing and through his influence is like, yeah, we all have a lot of things to do. We all have a lot of companies to build and organizations to lead, but you need the people to do it, and you need to show up for them, be about them, value them, support them, which is probably second nature for anyone that's taking the time to listen to this show or ones like it. But it is still like a foreign language or fluffy BS to a lot of really traditional minded managers and bosses in industries like policing. So I baked in a compliment in there and then I made some other commentary.
No, I do think you're right because oftentimes, regardless of agency or what your organization may be doing, factory work, retail, etc., folks are promoted based on their technical aptitude and skill, right? You're a really good police officer, so you're going to make a really great sergeant. But what there's missing in that gap is it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a great leader. And it is a completely different skill set. And, I believe Simon has said a couple different times that the best leaders he knows are the ones that continually learn about leadership and strive to study leadership to be good leaders. And I think all three of us on this call would say that even though we strive to inspire our folks, we strive to care for our folks, none of us think that we're masters of our craft yet. And I do think that's what makes us unique at times is that we'll never stop, right? We're never going to say, okay, I figured it out. It's now, Friday the 19th of December. I'm good. I don't have to continue to learn. I've mastered this thing after more than 2 decades of trying. And I think that's part of what the curve is for us is that, yes, we're spreading a message, but we're also learning from one another and improving and trying to hone and sharpen those skills so that we can be better at what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's said really well. And leadership is a thing that I, for a long time, felt really uncomfortable trying to relay that I was really into it or like I was really fascinated by it because I was worried about the perception that it inferred that I thought I was a good leader. Right. And so to read leadership books, and there are those types, there's like the archetype of the person that carries around the leadership book. And I've known some in my career that you're like, are you reading that thing you carry around all the time? Because it looks like there's some dog ears in there, but are you actually like, using any of this stuff? Or just like to pull out some fancy quote, but then in interpretation, you're like, I don't see how you're doing any of these things. It looks like you're literally trying to prove the opposite by what you do. So, yeah, I think that to be a lifelong learner, to be a student of leadership, as some people say, I think that is the goal. With so many things that can be mastered, I kind of wonder about the concept of mastering leadership because to recognize a mastery, one, I don't know if you can do it yourself as a leader. I think that it has to be defined by those that follow you and choose to, not because they have to, but because they want to. But then also, like so many things, if you feel like you've made it, like then it slips. Like if you stop moving, then you're not in the place where you need to be anymore. Yeah, Siobhan, I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that when we look at leadership, um, that it is a constant process of evolution and moving from student to practitioner is really the challenge because I'm sure like we all know people who read all the books, but when it comes to the practical application of the knowledge, that's the stumbling block. And I think that's the stumbling block for most of us to read and to educate ourselves is in many respects the easy part. The hard
Mhm.
part is taking what we learn and applying it to the difficult conversations, applying it to influencing our group. That's the challenge. So, as far as your point regarding mastery, I think that when you care about something, you continue to sharpen the blade and you continue to figure out what works and what doesn't. And leadership is an evolution. And with each, I don't know, like when you made it or you have a leadership win, in many respects, you level up, whether it's professionally, right? You get a promotion and then the challenges become harder, or you're met with a different challenge that makes you have to flex muscles that you didn't really know you had. It's constant improvement and constant struggle and overcoming to become the best sort of leader. But I agree with you that the measurement of success isn't something that we can give ourselves. It's our people that get to determine whether or not we are, in fact, good leaders.
Yeah, and when we talk about mastery, I think it's relevant to say that we're not just academics. I don't mean that in a negative way, but because the difference between learning the concepts and then applying it, right? Like discerning there is a huge difference. Like I might be perceived a certain way, or some people might really like this aspect if I just quoted a bunch of leadership textbooks all the time and I'm posting on social and I'm talking about this stuff on the podcast. Sometimes when I get a compliment from people that haven't worked around me, they compliment my take on leadership or "Well, you're a strong leader." I'm like, how do you know that? Like, and I'm not trying to shuck away like compliments, but I also am because do you really know? Like, actually, is there some anecdote that you see or evidence that you see that I'm not aware of? Because really, I don't think much of that. No offense, but like, unless you somehow know what I've been able to build or how I've been able to build it, or do the people that work for me or around me actually see that or feel it in the way that I intend? So I think that is very nuanced. It can be very conceptual, but then to put into practice that mastery, I think where the mastery really shines and it up levels your leadership ability is like you being passionate about the thing. So kind of like Siobhan saying, what is the thing we're doing? We're not just trying to lead, we're trying to accomplish a mission. And when Chela can talk about how much research and how much awareness she has on integrating innovative tech into these spheres, and when I'm able to talk to Siobhan about tactics and investigative cases that she was a part of and like her passion for that, like I'm like, now I see all the nuance of the policing industry, not just like leadership, not just like we're not just talking principles to talk about them, but there is a real reason why we want to mobilize all these efforts the best way possible, which is the point of leadership. Like, how are we doing this mission of protecting the public, protecting the vulnerable? Shout out the curve for that definition from harm. That's what we're trying to do. We're not just trying to lead. We're not just trying to go out and grab a group of people and say, "Cool, I'm a good leader." We're trying to make the public safer.
But I think you have a good thought there because it's like, okay, how do you recognize that your leadership is being effective? I think sometimes it's that you start to disappear a little bit in your team, right? And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, it's like you don't want to be the type of leader that you're up on this pedestal and people are like, oh my gosh, I have a great idea. I need to run to Siobhan. I need to run to Eric and say, hey, is this good? Can I go do this thing? You want to be the kind of leader that has empowered and strengthened your folks enough that they're confident in running the show, right? We've given them the tools, we've given them the training, we've given them the confidence, and we've given them the latitude to know that we believe in their critical thinking skills. We believe in their dignity and their respect. We believe in their integrity to a point that we're not going to come down and say, "Why did you make this decision?" We're going to go in there and try to support, right? And if we get to that place where everyone's able to be supporting and give each other tools and training as opposed to try to steer or joystick folks around, then I think that's really a point where you're like, okay, I'm doing something well, that this team is working in a good way. And then it's just trying to expand that across more teams because policing is interesting in that yes, we're one really big team with one really great mission, but it's these small team environments that tend to struggle and then building the bridge across all these small teams to work effectively towards the same direction, right? Because you can have really strong teams within teams. Like the SWAT team is often looked at in, or whatever different organizations define as their SWAT team. They tend to be looked at as they train very well together. They speak the same language. So they don't have these vocabulary mistakes where it's being misinterpreted on the radio and they drill enough that they can trust one another's position. They know it's expected out of them. But when you put that team and drop it into a normal patrol staffing, they don't have that same feeling, right? They don't feel that same amount of camaraderie or feeling cherished by their leader. They're just another member that's going to be deployed to a beat to handle calls for service for that day, right? So it's like, how do we move that feeling of being in that specialized unit, regardless of what it is, across all of these teams? And I think that's really one of the biggest challenges of leadership in policing.
Yeah, I love how you said that. Like you kind of disappear, right? Because it's one, like philosophically, I think most people that listen And certainly like in our circles with the curve, like would say it's not about you. But then to that point, the operational piece is ironically, let's take me as a young officer or a developing leader where I had a lot of leadership lessons to make to make and create a lot by mistake or misstep or missed intentions or miscommunication would be. So the ironic piece is that it's not about you. So as a strong leader, if you're doing your job as a strong leader, you have other people that, as you said, Chela, you've built them up, but also you trust them, right? And I was just having a conversation recently with this concept of being on call all the time or being on your emails all the time, and although that signals like an overwork or potentially a quote unquote overcare by some people, I think it also says like an under trust of some people, right? And I know someone has to be the shot caller, someone has to be on call, but there's a reason why most agencies and cultures have a rotation. But if you're not allowing yourself to be tapped out and rotated, and you are with your family, you're with your friends, you're doing your thing, you're working out, if you have trouble actually turning it off and not checking your phone all the time, then there might be a trust and ability issue there. Kind of curious what you think about it, Siobhan, from your perspective.
I completely agree. Like, I think that one of the challenges of leadership is to trust your people. When you extend that trust, more often than not, you're met with greatness because you allow them the liberty of being innovative, give them the opportunity to shine and show what they're capable of outside of the kind of rigid limitations that your position may influence them to live in. I think, I've worked for a lot of great leaders who have given me a lot of latitude, and I've always done my very best to respect that trust. So I don't know. I think that those are the chances that we have to by extending trust to allow our teams to really um, grow and show us what they're capable of, which is one of the best rewards of I think being a leader is watching your team thrive without
Hmm.
your I don't know, rigid influence.
Yeah, it's like watching people develop. And I think it's one of the most exciting times when you have people that are stepping up and you see them kind of take on the next chapter. That's where mentorship comes in. Personally, we have a lot of movement upcoming. We have a couple of promotional processes, but when you see people are sharing that they're actually going to take the promotional test, which is a huge step. It's very vulnerable. It's very uncomfortable. It can be scary. It can be, I mean, it's super public, right? To put yourself into the ring, but to see how far people have come, like that's super exciting and rewarding. Are you looking for help with your rest and recovery, wanting to optimize your sleep and prime performance? Well, New Calm is built on neuroscience, and it's been used by special operators, SportTAC, pro sports teams, and many, many more for years. To learn more and access the best deals of the year, go to newcalm.co/grit. That's Newcalm, NUCALM.co/grit. This episode is sponsored by Hero Schedule. If your department needs better scheduling software that isn't outdated, clunky, and expensive, Hero Schedule is an easy switch. It's $4 per user per month, and they give you a free 30-day trial. Get started at heroschedule.com and click on Try Hero Schedule. I want to pivot the conversation a little bit more specific to the curve. Siobhan, so we connected on LinkedIn, and I know that you were working with the curve for a while. So can you tell us a little bit about the curve? And I know for longtime listeners, you'll remember that Chris Shung, the executive director, and now currently the new-ish acting undersheriff for San Mateo County again. Shout out to Chris. Great props there. There is hope for all those agencies out there that are going through a hard time. That's very public. That's not my subjective opinion, like it's in the news. So if you're curious, very intriguing read on San Mateo County and the uplifting rise as of late. But Siobhan, can you please tell us a little bit about your interaction with the curve and what you think about it and what it's been like?
So I was connected with a curve a little over a year ago. Christian reached out to me and told me about this movement that they had created and this group of people who were intent on improving the landscape of improving the when I first encountered them, it was just the breath of fresh air and optimism and motivation and inspiration that I think we as an industry are craving. Like they're intent on rebuilding bridges with the community and regaining the trust that is so fragile and so easy to lose with our community members and to create healthier, more resilient officers and staff so that we can interact with our communities at a higher level. So it's just amazingly powerful to be surrounded by people who have this similar initiative, including both of you. Like, such a gift to be around these thought leaders who are intent on changing the world and making our industry a better place to work in and a better place for our community to receive services from. So incredibly inspiring. We like to call it a movement rather than, we're not a training group. We're not strictly presenters. We're trying to change culture. And with Simon Sinek as one of our founders, he often talks about the law of diffusion. I know that people who are listening to your podcast, Eric, are part of the early adopters who are also interested in changing the culture of police work. And I think oftentimes as early adopters, we get frustrated because we want things to move faster. We want things to be better now. And why can't it be? And
Hmm.
you look at Simon's teaching on the law, if we really focus on the early adopters and the early majority, the scale is eventually tipped, and those late adopters or late majority rather, and laggards are kind of forced along. So I think, you know, figuring out who your people are, figuring out who's like-minded and want to make this world a better place, this industry a better place, and just grabbing onto them and holding them tight as you roll through this ride of change is so important. And that's what the curve is all about, is being that ripple of change, beautiful change in this industry.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it's so rewarding to know that other people exist out there that are thinking, like, hey, what can we do? And I'm not saying I have the best answers. I certainly don't. I have some ideas. I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of curiosity of like what else is possible. And I think that a lot of us recognize that if we've been in the job for a little bit, we recognize that there's so many challenges and a lot of them like shouldn't be the prevailing part of our conscious energy, right? And if it's teamwork, if it's getting aligned behind a mission, I mean, there's so much just negative energy when the purpose is pretty clear. Like have a lot of friends that it's not that clear. It's profits or it's strategy and this and that, and they're trying to the company they work for, the company they're leading, like there's all these purposes that are important. However, one thing that we are not remiss from is we are not lacking is this really important purpose. And if that doesn't unify people, then you're kind of like, where are we at? Like, how is that not enough? Maybe we'll get right into the conversation we started before the recording or we are having, but that's where I'm at. I'm like, why are people so corrosive towards each other when there's clearly a job to do? And a lot of us, a lot of people out there would give so much to be able to be a part of this very clear mission. A lot of people want to be police officers. A lot of people want to be dispatchers. A lot of people want to be EMS, and they're not able to for whatever handful of reasons. And people desire purpose. They want to be part of something. They want to contribute to something. And so when we have all that very clearly and it's not enough to make us positive and cohesive, and then I'm like, what are we doing here? So I do love that is an aspect that you described so well, like the curve's intent and the mission and the law of diffusion, right? So it's getting to that tipping point where you have critical mass where you're like, yep, this is the direction we're going. Yes, we have an organization that we care about people first. Yes, we care about what the community thinks and says, not just doing a couple pop-up events and just posting on social media. Like there's more meat to it. Chella, I'm gonna turn it over to you before I keep rambling.
So I got involved in the curb in kind of a slow boil, if you will. So I met Chris Young about 3 years ago just by fate. So I had signed up to do mock interviews, not because I was looking to promote or do something different, but because I always think that if we're putting ourselves in situations where we can learn or take away something that we're going to be able to help others achieve their goals as well. So he was one of the gentlemen that was interviewing me in this scenario. And it was him and a past assistant chief of mine. And so that was like a really good full circle moment for me. But, they interviewed me as if I was applying for a position. And at the end, I kind of gave my closing statement. And Chris asked me a question and it evoked a little bit of emotion. And all of us try to be really strong and kind of professional. And so I was pretty irritated at him that he was able to pull this emotion out of me. And I got a little teary. And so I apologized. And he said, I will be honest with you, that was the strongest part of your interview because it brought out your passion, it brought out your heart. And I can tell how much you love this work. And so that obviously really resonated with me. So after the had concluded, he said, let's stay in touch. I want to make sure that we can follow each other and help each other out in future situations. So I thought it was a kind thing to say, but I didn't realize he was serious, right? And so over the next couple of years, we stayed in touch on LinkedIn, or, I'd publish an article in Police One, or he would publish an article. And so we'd comment to each other about each other's work. And then I started following the curve and started educating myself on the work there and was obviously inspired and motivated by it. And so I started watching some of the webinars that they were doing and asked other people to join them. And then I reached out to Chris one day and I said, hey, I don't know if you understand what an effect that interview coaching that you did for me has had on other dispatch professionals in Northern California. But I took what you taught me and I've taught it to these other 5 people.
Mhm.
And these 5 people were all successful and have gone on to be managers and directors at these other organizations who are then teaching it to their people, right? So it had this really tangible ripple effect that was improving leadership in this area. And he was like, it's funny that you reach out to me. I actually have a person who needs some help. Would you join me on a call? So of course I said yes. And so we worked this call together about a problem that was happening at a dispatch center in the Midwest. And then afterwards he said, would you be willing to start working with the curve? Which of course I had to think about really hard. I said, of course I would. I'd be honored. And so that's kind of how I came into it. But I think we are all faced with similar questions where folks say, well, what does that exactly mean? What does it
Mhm.
mean that you're working with the curve or you're supporting the curve, or what is it that you're trying to accomplish? And I think it's just that. I think what we've discovered is that people who still have quite a bit of time in policing are hungry to know what their internal purpose is. And so if we are able to help them hone in on that again and find that pilot light, which will help them continue to show up, regardless of what they may be experiencing in the sibling violence of their own agency, then we've served our purpose, right? And so you kind of you glanced over it a little bit about that sibling violence that we have in our own organizations. And I don't think it's unique to any one organization. I've
No.
worked for several different organizations. And yes, you're going to find it in company cultures that are not policing related, right? But I think in policing, it's a little bit unique because I expect you, as my colleague, to go through some critical events with me and for us to protect one another, right? We rely on each other not just to be kind in the break room, but to protect one another in a life or death situation.
Mhm.
And that makes it a really unique relationship. So, why do we do these things where we may or may not be fumbling around with other folks' confidence? You would think that I would really want to bolster your confidence that we can get together in a firefight and do well
Mhm.
instead of me knocking you down, right? I think what happens is we all have incredibly high expectations, and that expectation can kind of churn into an unhealthy space. And then we're also trained to identify problems, right? And so it's really hard for us to switch off that desire to identify problems when we're inside our own station house or our service center or whatever it may be. And so I'm expecting you to go out into the field, right? Identify all these issues and then come back in and tell me everything's great. That's just it's not an on-off switch, right? So you're gonna come in and you're say, I am a trained investigator. I've identified this problem and I need you to fix it. And I would say, well, bureaucracy being what it is, I have to write a memo and I have to go to council and then, right? And then you get frustrated because you need whatever it is that you need to do your job effectively. And it is incredibly frustrating where you're like, you expect me to protect the public, but you can't get me this piece of equipment, I need to do my job well. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That may
Mhm.
just be your belief or your perception, but we hold each other to a very high standard. We want to fix things. And I think that bleeds over into the relationships that we have with one another. So, anyway, that was a long form answer. But if, as part of the curve, what we can do for one another is to refocus that energy to one of, all right, what is actually our inherent purpose? What is it that made us want to join this wonderful life that we call policing? And how can we turn our perception to what has this job done to me? How have I been victimized by this career?
Mhm.
And instead say, like, how much has it given to me? Like, am I able to have my children live in a neighborhood that I feel that they're safe in? Am I able to have opportunities to speak to people who are as driven as I am about making a difference in our community? Have I been able to make my community safer? Right. And I think if we're able to focus on what we've been given through this work or what we've been able to experience or the lives that we've literally been able to change, then we give people a refocusing and a softening of that criticism of one another. So, if we don't do anything else, I still think it's a very valuable cause and something that will pay dividends.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's huge in all those things you mentioned. You mentioned several key things, and one of the where I'll start is that disparate expectations, where I would agree. And I think that the more committed you are, and this is not like a it's not like a point system, but the more people are into their career, the more people are high drive, high performers, those expectations of self are so high. And so those are some of the most self-critical people I've known or I've worked alongside. These are either peers, bosses, people working on my team, where I see how hard they beat themselves up, and sometimes that does translate into, well, why isn't this person doing that? Or why aren't we supposed to do this? Or they should. And my current boss has been really helpful to me on one-on-ones to call out the should. He's like, you got to be really careful with should. And I would agree, because it attaches this, there's usually some emotion on it. It attaches this kind of blame, which is a style or a type of kind of dark energy villain mentality, which is someone needs to fix this. Like someone is not doing what they're supposed to do, which metabolizes into resentment. And just like unmet expectations are like the biggest hindrance to a healthy relationship of any type. Like once we get to resentment, I think this is the Gottmans. That's a bad place to be, right? If there's any resentment in your romantic relationship, you got to get onto something like therapy and do all the things, because that is such a negative, corrosive emotion. And yet, it's prevalent in our teams, in our organizations. And this is all organizations, certain pockets, right? And certain people that are hard to work with. But that resentment is what we really need to be mindful of. So I love that point you made. And also talking about the purpose. And I think it is hard. I think we need to recognize that it's hard to maintain that fuel, that fire, despite what I kind of propose, which is like, guys, like we have a job to do. It's literally helping people be safer, often saving lives. Like if a call receiver dispatch a scenario does not go well, someone's life could be in danger. When it goes critically well, sometimes lives are saved. Whereas if the conversation went okay, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Maybe they did an okay, pretty good job, but when they went like above and beyond, they really picked up on some nuances. Like lives were saved. Like that's no small feat. And yet, after a number of years, you're like, what am I doing? I'm working with these systems that are revolving doors, and I don't think anything's changing. And I'm saying it's very understandable why we get to that place. I'd love to turn it over to Siobhan, kind of build on, what Chela was saying, and where you're at with that thought on, I mean, it could be any of the things that we just talked about. I don't want to pigeonhole you into one thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think with police work, like it's baked into the profession that we are judgmental. Right? We're called to a scene where we have to quickly assess what's going on. We have to not necessarily assign blame, but determine who is at fault and then take those follow up steps to correct whatever the behavior is. And it's very hard when something like judgment is baked into our routine for us to turn it off like a light switch when it comes to each other. So, and even ourselves, right? So, like that judge, judgmental mindset also starts to take over when we're interacting with each other and we assign blame for a given situation or a way that a call was handled or whatever the case may be. We assign blame and then we want it to be corrected. And we don't necessarily have that authority to correct an issue with our peer. So it becomes frustrating. And then,
Hmm.
kind of to circle back to your idea of the Gottman principles, I mean, fundamentally, a relationship is a relationship, whether it's with your coworker, whether it's with your significant other. And so, changing our viewpoint from, me versus you to us versus the problem becomes more and more imperative. So recognizing that the default setting is likely judgmental and then acknowledging that about our own personalities and settings and then moving from that to, hey, I'm being judgmental right now and I shouldn't be against my partner. This is us versus the problem or us towards the mission. So it takes discipline because we are so predisposed to lean into judgment rather than collaboration. But I do think that with that discipline, we can start to shift our mindset and approach problems differently.
Yeah, so well said. Chella, I want to go to you and that concept of like, how do we find the good? How do we focus on the good? How do we encourage others to focus on the good? Because we don't need encouragement to focus on the bad, right? On the
Right.
things that need fixing, either the victimhood that's pervasive of like, woe is me, this job sucks, my boss sucks, nothing changes, what's the point? I can't arrest anyone, or the charges will get dropped, right? We know that. But then we also talked about the villain mentality of like, that unit needs to get their stuff together. If they would just hump calls like we are, then everything would be better. It's a BS mission that they have, whatever, right? Like, let's focus on our lane and how do we do that with the positive spin on it.
Um, I think that can be a fairly loaded question because you don't wanna have that toxic positivity, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
you're like,
Right.
"Everything is sunshine and rainbows. We don't have any problems. I'm not gonna look at this issue." And so you've gotta
Mm-hmm.
find that balance, right? You have to find the balance of being realistic for your team, but also truly celebrating what it is that we do for work. I did something last year that I thought was going to really shine a light on the team that I manage, and oftentimes, the statistic that gets pulled out of comm centers that gets put in a city manager or a city council review is call answering times, right? Because it makes sense to people,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something that people care about when they're the citizens and they're like, "I want my 911 call answered within 10 seconds, 15
Yeah.
seconds," right? And it's a very easily digestible and understood statistic. But I was like, "Man, this is the only statistic that is regularly seen by the public, and there's so much more work that goes into it." So I gathered how many radio transmissions have been done in a year, and then I gathered how many transactions in the law enforcement databases have been done in that year, and I captured how many reports have been approved or written in that year. And so I started to try to quantify the work in a different way and then articulate that behind each one of those transactions or transmissions or phone calls was critical thinking, judgment, aptitude, experience, right? Because you can't tell me something on the radio and me not understand what you're saying and for me to just accept it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is my duty to keep going after it until I understand exactly what you mean so that I can protect you, get you the help that you need, get you the apparatus that you need, whatever the case may be, right? So I'm thinking I'm doing a great job by doing this. So then one of the line level dispatchers comes in and she says, "I don't know why you're focusing on these things instead of focusing on the calls that matter." And it was more for her about the story, right? And we all know that telling something with data is really great, but if you can tell it in a story, it's much more impactful. And so while I can't necessarily put all of their stories into a city council presentation at the end of the year because that would be too lengthy, we can still start telling each other our stories. And so I find that focusing on the good is really important to understand how you need me to focus on the good. And that goes back to knowing your people. And as a leader, it really is part of our job and our role to understand each other with enough familiarity to understand how to celebrate you, right? And so it goes back to that language of appreciation. And if you, Eric, are not motivated by me saying, "Hey, Eric, look at your scorecard. You were phenomenal. You did all of these things well." You're like, "Cool, huck it in the shredder. You're
Hmm.
done." But I
Hmm.
say, "Hey, Eric, last night when you were holding that young mom's hand while her baby was getting CPR, I saw the care, attention that you put into her and your compassion, and it really made a difference." Right? It's going to connect with you at a different level. So when we were talking about focusing on the good, I think it comes down to knowing your people and knowing them enough to be able to praise them in a way that resonates with them and makes them feel seen and cherished.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I do love the discernment, like not toxic positivity. There's a, so to complete the loop, I think it was on the Pulling the Thread podcast, which talks about psychology and philosophy a lot. It's a new fascinating listen for me, but there was a doctor that was, I want to say, what she was talking about was these different archetypes, right? The victim, villain, and then the third one's the hero. And there's a light and dark version of all of them. And the dark, or not, or maybe the under the line or below the line, however it was phrased, was everything's fine, guys. Like don't pay attention to that. And you're trying to care for them, but with not with this constructive energy, right? Because ignoring our problems and sweeping stuff under the rug, it festers. It's not the solution. So I like how you pointed that out. And then stats versus story, right? Stories can be very motivating for other people. Stats can be useful in certain times, but is it the right stats? I love that knowing your people concept. It makes me think about the love languages and, whether it's gifts, and, gifts might be like, hey, you don't have to do that crappy detail, right? That could be a gift in like a policing type of culture terms. Quality time, like, hey, you get to work this op with your buddies. So these different concepts that are traditionally thought of in just romantic relationships. But, years after I heard the concept and I thought, oh my gosh, I could apply this to other members of my family. Or this is the problem with me and my friend when they keep reaching out and like I feel like I don't have time. Well, they're like totally like a time, like quality time thing. So me getting them a gift card at holiday season means nothing to them. It's actually probably like a slap in the face because I didn't take the time to go get a meal, once a month or once a quarter. So yeah, that's just what jumps out at me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like the more that I study relationship, traditional books like attachment styles or Gottman or whatever, the more that I see those dynamics play out, not just in my intimate relationship, but also like relationships, period, whether they're with my children or with my coworkers or my supervisor, like thinking about love languages or thinking about attachment styles. Like, do you have an avoidant who doesn't feel comfortable having these vulnerable conversations and shoots for the door? Or do you have someone who's anxious on your team who's looking for that validation from you and needs it in order to feel secure in their work environment? I mean, all of these things play out in our interactions with being human. So, I think that there's a lot of value in looking at that as it relates to our teams and their needs and making them emotionally healthy and secure so that they can interact with their community at a higher level. I think it's important that we recognize those parallels to get the most out of our people and to take care of them in the best possible way.
Yeah, the stuff both of you are talking about to me is illustrating this next level, right? I think that the baseline is like, hey, know your people and know what their motivators are, like, right? Like what career goals do they have, or what type of work do they enjoy? How do they like to receive feedback? Which is tricky enough. Like that's not easy stuff. Even when people say, yeah, boss, shoot straight. I want it direct. Like, caveat to that, in my personal experience, a lot of people that have said that, it was absolutely not true. Did not go well. So it takes time to build that relationship and that trust and to know people and feel that out. But yeah, you are both going to this like next level of how you can look at your team relationships, your work relationships. For a lot of people listening, they are trying to find out how they can be more effective leaders, whether that's informally or whether that is formally as a supervisor. I talked about this before the recording kicked up, which is like, if a certain comment I make or a certain question I pose could reopen Pandora's box of another 20 to 40 minutes. So I want to be mindful of that. But I do want to go to each of you and kind of ask you what you're excited about with the curve, what you're excited about with the direction that you see in policing, focusing on the real, the positive movement and conversations that are being had, and then tell us where people can find you online. So why don't we start with Chella?
Thank you. So, what I'm excited about with the curve, I think, was really espoused in this recent massive retreat because it was the first time that we had the city managers there and represented. And then I was there to represent professional staff, which was a huge honor. And then having Scott Savage there to talk about
Hmm.
training, right? So I think my excitement right now is that we're looking at policing from a multifaceted space and figuring out how to get this purpose and this mission across in a way that's holistic as opposed to from the top down, right? And we've seen that line folk and middle managers are really engaging with the concepts of the curve because they're going to be our leaders coming forward, right? And so I think that's what's motivating and exciting to me is that we're in this if we want to go back to that tipping point, Siobhan, we are at this tipping point. We're at a precipice of this next wave of what policing is going to become. And if we can help influence, guide, or motivate those folks that are going to be in this tipping point, I find that very fulfilling. And to be able to bring some professional staff perspective and voice to the table is a huge responsibility. One of the things I shared at Massive is the large percentage of our policing organizations that are professional staff.
Hmm.
And in most states, the only folks that receive formal training are police officers and dispatchers. It doesn't capture your real time operators. It doesn't capture your records technicians, your CSIs, your CSOs, whatever classification you may have in there. And then people are surprised when they promote these folks into a leadership position and they don't thrive. And they think, oh, well, it's because they're not as sophisticated as we are on the sworn side. And I always have to say, well, hold up a minute. How many times have you interviewed for a position? Because you guys have ancillaries. You've got K9, you've got SWAT, you've got firearms, whatever the case may be. They're like, oh, I probably do an interview once a year. I'm like, okay, the last time this person had an interview was when we hired them 14 years ago,
Yeah.
right? So they're not going to interview as well because they don't have the reps that you do. And then the amount of training hours that you've had, how many training hours, right? So if we are not focusing on that, if we're not giving our professional staff the training hours, the opportunities to have some leadership training, I'm not sure how we can get our entire organizations to rise at the rate in which the public expects us to rise. They want us to be more sophisticated. They want us to be more educated. They want us to have a better perspective of how to serve them well in a tech driven, highly public, highly transparent era of policing. So, in order to do that, then we need to make sure that all of us rise together. So, I'm excited about bringing that perspective to the curve and hopefully to some more folks. And as far as finding me, I'm on LinkedIn. You can always find me there and hopefully more crossover events with you folks. And then I do have some stuff on Police One, and I'm just happy to be here, Eric.
Awesome. I love the nod to if we want to treat this industry like a professional one, then we need to do the things that are required of a profession, which is professional development and coaching and mentoring, and that's informal but also very, very formalized. Like let's make it a real thing. Build it in and bake it into the culture. Thanks so much,
Absolutely.
Chella.
Thank
Siobhan,
you.
over to you.
Um, I just wanted to echo to with Chella. She has such a beautiful way of articulating things and simplifying it, but w- how she articulates it is so measured, and every word is so intently chosen. So it's
Hmm.
I don't know. She's incredible. So, with regard to what I'm most excited about with working with the curve, we get to be the tip of the spear. We get to help spread this important message to our agencies, to anybody who will listen, to the guests or the listeners on your podcast. I mean, we get to help influence the change, and that is such a special honor to be a part of something like that. And I love that I get to work with such amazing individuals like you. I mean, it's been such a gift to be surrounded by such greatness. Like, it's so inspiring for me to be able to connect with you all and to be a part of this movement. Um, Simon puts it. So I think that, historically, the policing profession has achieved its culture through default. Like, there has not been a thought process that has been built into where our culture has gone. And now we're kind of tapping the brakes and saying, that's not working. We need to be intentional about how we choose our culture. And we have choice, remembering that we have choice. So I think it's really impactful, again, to be around these thought leaders who are all focused, like laser focused on where we're going to bring this profession and how we're going to make it better. And to that end, so when we talk about stats and we talk about story, I think stats are they show the picture of the finite game. And it's not that it isn't like a part of policing, but it is a part of policing. The story is so much more impactful than the stat. And I think the more that we start to share our stories and humanize our profession, the greater our contact is going to be with the community that we serve. Because being seen as human beings, like oftentimes I think police officers are viewed as robotic or, just the soldiers of the home front. And
Hmm.
we're not. We're part of the community that we are serving oftentimes, right? We live in these communities. And so in order to be recognized as human, we have to show our humanity. That's the exchange. So that's where the story comes in. And that's where, holding hands with a mom whose child isn't breathing. Like those sorts of stories help to make us relatable and show our humanity and help to develop those connection points that I think we all want to have more of within our communities and between each other.
Yeah, I love that. And for those listening, a couple things. Follow along with the Curve. You can find them at thecurve.org. The Curve is on Instagram. It's on LinkedIn. You both are on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. So it's to say that I feel like a lot of folks would be like, man, how do I get in? Like, how do I get more of that? Because what you guys have together, and I would say that you do have it and you are part of it because you're listening in. And if you've been with us for the hour and you've been with the types of conversations that happen here, if you go and find some of Siobhan's writing and some of Chela's writing, then you're are part of it, right? And if you share this episode and you have a conversation offline with your coworker or your colleague that you knew from academy because you're sharing some of their same frustrations, you're trying to grow through different obstacles together. That's what it's all about, right? It's not like one flavor, it's not one solution. It's like conceptually, how do we focus on constructive energy to innovate, help policing innovate and go to the place we need it to go and the place we know we can go through collaboration, through these positive energies, not fluffy stuff, but like real stuff. And so that's a little bit of my tag there. I I feel very fortunate to know both of you. I haven't mentioned it so far, but there's all these prominent leaders, and I don't want to say they're not these. There's so many strong, like truly, like with the best value of the word, strong uh, leadership types. But sometimes when we say strong personalities, strong leaders, like we think like abrasive, right? We think like their way, their highway. Like there was none of that. It was really fascinating to me. I didn't expect to see any of it, but to see it's just such warm humility off the charts from like, regardless of rank and size of agency, but everyone's just there to contribute and to learn and just to grow together. That's what I find so positive, and it's very reflective in the blogs on the Curve. It's very reflective in the messaging and the videos with Simon, and so I'm super stoked about it, just to simply kind of be riding alongside and be a part of it, and listeners, you are as well. So again, Chela, Siobhan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been great to chat again.
Thank you. This was such a gift.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.